My grandkids said it over the phone. A Tuesday. The phone call felt like any other. It cut through the quiet of my workshop, a shrill interruption to the scent of linseed oil and old wood. I was polishing my father's old hand plane, feeling the smooth, worn weight of the mahogany handle in my palm. A tool that built half the furniture in my house. A tool that held a history. Grandpa. It was Leo, the older one. He sounded distant, distracted. I could hear his sister, Maya, giggling in the background, the sound tinny and far away. "I'm here, son. How are you?" "We're good. We're at your house." Of course they were. My son, Robert, and his wife, Susan, had a key. They didn't see it as my house, not really. They saw it as a family asset. A glorified storage unit with a live-in caretaker who happened to be their father. They came and went as they pleased, grabbing a tool Robert had forgotten or dropping off things that wouldn't fit in their own overflowing garage. "We were playing in the attic," Leo said. His voice was flat, a statement of fact, not a confession. "All right," I said, my thumb still tracing the brass fitting on the plane. I waited. There was always a reason for these calls, a request disguised as a conversation. "We broke the family Bible," he said, just like that. No hesitation, no tremor in his voice. In the background, Maya's giggle turned into a shriek of laughter, probably at a cartoon on her tablet. The world didn't stop. The dust motes still danced in the single beam of afternoon light cutting through the window. The old clock on the wall kept ticking its slow, relentless rhythm. But something inside me went still. A deep, cold stillness that started in my chest and spread outward to my fingertips. My hand on the hand plane felt numb. "The one your great-grandmother carried," he added, as if providing helpful context, like he was identifying a piece of broken dishware. "The blue plate, the one with the chip." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. What was there to say? It was really old. Maya piped in, having momentarily looked up from her screen. The pages just fell out everywhere. Like confetti. That's what she saw. Not the spidery, elegant script of my great-grandmother writing her children's names on the inside cover. Not the pressed dogwood flower from my own wife Eleanor's wedding bouquet, tucked between the pages of Ruth. Not the faint, pencil-drawn line under a verse in Psalms that my father had underlined during the war, a verse I read every single night before I shipped out to Vietnam myself. She saw confetti. "It just split," Leo said, a hint of annoyance in his voice now, as if the Bible's fragility was a personal inconvenience to him. "We were building a fort with the old chests, and it fell." I closed my eyes. I could see it perfectly. That Bible. It wasn't a grand, gilded thing. It was small, bound in dark, cracked leather, the corners worn smooth from 100 years of hands. My great-grandmother, Mariah, had carried it from a dusty town in Mississippi all the way to Chicago during the Great Migration. She told me once that everything she owned was in a single bag, but her history was in that book. Births, deaths, marriages. A single, unbroken line connecting a woman who was born into the faint memory of slavery to a boy like me, who would one day see a man walk on the moon. It wasn't just a book. It was the cornerstone. It was the documentation of a family that the world tried very hard to erase. It was proof that we were here, that we had endured, and they had used it as a structural element in a pillow fort. "Did you tell your father?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. "Hello." "Yeah, he's here," Leo said. I heard the phone being passed, the muffled sound of Robert's voice. "Dad, you there? Kids told you? Don't worry, I'll sweep it up, like it was sawdust on the floor, like it was spilled sugar." He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say he was disappointed in them. He didn't acknowledge what had been lost. He just offered a solution to the mess. A practical, dismissive, infuriatingly logical solution. "Robert," I said. The name felt like a stone in my mouth. "Yeah, Dad. Look, I gotta run. Susan wants to get on the road before traffic gets bad. We just stopped by to grab the big cooler for the lake this weekend. You're good for watching Buster, right? I'll drop him off Friday. They had a trip planned. The lake. They hadn't invited me. They had simply informed me of my duties. Dugsitter. House watcher. The old man who is always there, a fixed point of convenience in their busy lives. The Bible. The trip. The dog. It all swirled together into a thick, choking cloud. For years, I had been feeling it. A slow erosion of my own personhood. I was no longer Arthur Williams, the man who ran his own mechanic shop for 40 years, the man who could rebuild a carburetor with his eyes closed, the man who loved Etta James and knew how to smoke a brisket for 16 hours until it wept. I had become Dad Grandpa title, a role, a resource, a set of hands to fix a leaky faucet, a bank account to be drawn from for a down payment, a free kennel for their designer dog. And now, I was the silent custodian of a pile of confetti on the attic floor. I heard what you said. I managed to get out. My voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. Okay, good. So Friday morning for Buster. Great. Gotta go, Dad. Love you, he hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, loud and intrusive in the sudden silence. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. The click was definitive. Final. I looked at my hands. They were not trembling. Not yet. They were steady. The hand that held my father's plane was stained with oil and marked with the small, white scars of a lifetime of work. The other hand rested on my knee, the denim of my work jeans rough beneath my palm. I sat there in my workshop for a long time. The sunbeams shifted, moving from the workbench to the concrete floor, illuminating the fine layer of sawdust that covered everything. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick, tock. Each tick a second of my life passing. Each tock a confirmation of the decision that was forming, hard and clear as a diamond, in the cold stillness of my heart. It was not anger. I had felt anger before. Red hot and blinding. This was different. This was clarity. This was the quiet, calm click of a lock falling into place. They had broken a book, but they had shattered an illusion. The illusion I had so carefully maintained for years. The illusion that I was a cherished patriarch, the respected elder of a loving family. I was a ghost in my own life, a useful ghost, and I just realized I could simply walk away. Not from the house, not from the town, but from the role they had assigned me. I stood up. My knees popped, a familiar complaint. I carefully wiped down my father's hand plane with a soft cloth, the motions automatic, ingrained by decades of habit. I placed it back in its designated spot in the tool chest. Then I walked out of the workshop, closing the door behind me, and went into the house to begin. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It was a house built for noise, for the sound of my Eleanor laughing in the kitchen, for the clamor of a young robber and his friends playing in the yard. Now it only held the echoes. And me. I went to the kitchen first. The heart of the home, Eleanor used to say. It felt more like a museum exhibit now. The faint smell of her rose-scented dish soap still clung to the air, a scent I could never bring myself to replace. I opened the cupboard and took down a single mug. It was heavy, ceramic, a deep blue. My favorite. I brewed a pot of coffee. Strong, black, the way I like it. The way Robert always complained about. Dad, this stuff will dissolve a spoon, he'd say, pouring in a comical amount of cream and sugar. I watched the dark liquid drip into the glass pot, the aroma rich and earthy. It was a smell of ritual, of mornings, of solitude. I poured a single cup. No more. I wasn't expecting company. With the warm mug in my hands, I walked into the living room and sat down in my chair. It was an old leather wingback, cracked and worn in all the right places, molded to the shape of my body over thousands of evenings. This chair was one of the few things I had fought for. When Susan had decided to update the living room a few years back, she had marked it for disposal. It's so dated, Arthur. It ruins the whole aesthetic. I had stood in front of it, my arms crossed. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "This chair stays." The finality in my tone surprised her. It surprised me. She had relented, rolling her eyes, but she had relented. It was a small victory, but it felt hollow. A stay of execution, not a pardon. The rest of the room was now a sea of beige and gray, uncomfortable furniture that looked like it belonged in a doctor's waiting room. My chair was an island of my own history in an ocean of their taste. I took a sip of coffee. The heat spread through my chest, a small comfort against the spreading cold. I thought about the Bible. I thought about confetti. And then I started thinking about all the other things. The other moments. The little cuts. The 1,000 paper cuts of disrespect that can bleed a man dry without him even noticing. I remember the barbecue last summer. Our family's 4th of July tradition. I had always manned the grill. It was my domain. I had my own sauce, a recipe passed down from my grandfather. It had molasses, a little bourbon, secrets I never wrote down. People used to come from 2 blocks over just to get a taste. But last year, Robert had bought a new, gleaming stainless steel gas grill. It had 6 burners and a side compartment for something called infrared searing. He'd unveiled it with a flourish. "No more charcoal for you, Dad. This is way more efficient." He took the tongs from my hand, gently but firmly, as if he were disarming a child. "Let me handle this, Pop. You just relax." I watched him cremate a dozen chicken thighs, the flames leaping up in greasy flares. He didn't know how to manage the heat. He didn't understand the patience of smoke. He just wanted it done. Efficiently. I had gone inside, my jar of sauce still sitting on the counter, untouched. I sat in this very chair and listened to them laugh outside, their voices muffled by the glass. I felt like a photograph of myself. I took another sip of coffee. The memory didn't sting as much as it used to. It was just data, another entry in a long ledger of evidence. There was the time they sold my old truck, a 1972 Ford F-100. I bought it new, drove Eleanor to the hospital in it when she was in labor with Robert, taught Robert how to drive in it. Its engine was a part of me. I knew its every cough and sputter. I could diagnose it by sound alone. It sat in the garage, a project I was saving for my retirement. I was going to restore it, frame off, every nut and bolt, for me. Then Robert's car broke down, a new, foreign thing full of computers I couldn't understand. He needed money for a new one. He and Susan sat me down at my own dining room table. They had spreadsheets. They called it asset liquidation. "Dad, the truck is just sitting there," Robert had said, his voice full of reason. "It's a rust bucket, but it's a classic. Some collector will pay good money for it. It's a practical way to free up some capital. That's what my truck was. Not a vessel of memories. Not a future joy. Capital. I let them sell it. It was easier than arguing. Easier than trying to explain that some things have a value that can't be entered on a spreadsheet. A man came with a flatbed tow truck and winched it away. I watched from the window, my hands in my pockets. It felt like they were towing a part of my own body. Robert used the money for a down payment on a car that looked like a silver egg. He never mentioned the truck again. And the money. The trust funds. That was the biggest secret. The biggest testament to my foolish, hopeful heart. From the day Leo was born, and then Maya, I started putting money aside. I wasn't a rich man, but I was careful. I came from a generation that understood thrift. We didn't throw things away. We fixed them. We saved. I ran my own business. And while Robert saw it as a dirty, greasy trade, it had been good to me. It had built this house. It had raised him. And it had allowed me to build a small, respectable fortune. I invested. I read the business pages when Robert was reading comic books. I bought stock in companies people had never heard of, companies that made things. Real things. Bolts. Wires. Transistors. I held on. I reinvested the dividends. For decades. The result was 2 substantial trust funds. One for each of them. Enough for any college they wanted to attend. Enough for a down payment on a house of their own. Enough to give them a start in life that I never had. My son, Robert, knew about them in a vague sense. He assumed it was a small savings account, a few $1,000s for textbooks. He had no idea of the scale. He had no idea of the discipline, the sacrifice, the sheer patient labor that had gone into building them. He and Susan had power of attorney over my affairs, a document they'd had me sign a few years ago. Just in case, Dad. To make things simpler for them. I finished my coffee. The cup was empty. The bottom held a fine sludge of grounds. I looked at it for a moment. Then I stood up and walked to the small mahogany desk in the corner of the room. It was my father's desk. Solid. Unpretentious. Like him. I opened the top drawer. Inside was a small, leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen. I used it to keep track of things. Oil changes. Birthdays. The last time I'd fertilized the roses. I opened it to a fresh page. The paper was clean, crisp. I uncapped the pen. The nib scratched slightly as I wrote. It was a single sentence. It is time to make things simple for myself. The ink was a dark, definitive black against the cream-colored page. I closed the notebook. The decision was no longer just a feeling. It was a fact. It was written down. I went back to the kitchen, washed my single mug, and placed it back in the cupboard. The house was still quiet, but it wasn't an empty quiet anymore. It was a clean quiet, the quiet of a space being cleared, the quiet before the work begins. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. This was not unusual. My body has run on its own clock for 80 years, a clock set by factory whistles and roosters, not by alarms. But this morning felt different. I didn't feel the familiar, dull ache of loneliness that often greeted me in the gray light of dawn. I felt steady. I felt a purpose I hadn't felt since I was a young man first opening my own shop. I put on my coffee, the same ritual as yesterday, but it felt new. I dressed not in my work jeans, but in my good trousers, a pressed shirt, and my Sunday shoes. I even put on a tie, a simple, dark blue one. Eleanor always said a man in a tie is a man who means business. I looked at myself in the hall mirror. An old man, yes. The lines on my face were a road map of my life. But my eyes were clear. There was a fire in them I hadn't seen in a long time. First, the lawyer. His name was Mr. Fields, a young man, sharp and professional. His father had been my lawyer for 30 years, a man I played chess with. When he passed, the son took over the practice. I had met him once, briefly. He seemed competent, unsentimental. That's what I needed. His office was downtown, in one of those new glass buildings that scrape the sky. It smelled of clean carpets and expensive paper, a sterile smell that was the opposite of my workshop. He met me in the lobby himself, a gesture of respect that felt surprising. "Mr. Williams," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm. "It's good to see you. Please, come in." We sat in his office. It overlooked the city, a view I'm sure cost a great deal of money. He didn't engage in small talk. He just folded his hands on his large, clean desk and looked at me. "How can I help you today?" "I need to make some changes to my affairs," I said. My voice was even. "I want to start by revoking a power of attorney." He didn't flinch. He just nodded, pulling a notepad closer. "Okay, and who currently holds that power?" "My son, Robert Williams, and his wife, Susan Williams." He wrote the names down. He didn't ask why. He didn't offer condolences for what was clearly a family schism. He was a professional facilitator, a tool, and he was precisely the tool I needed. "We can handle that immediately," he said. "I'll have the paperwork drawn up. It will need to be signed, notarized, and then a formal notice will be sent to them. They will receive it by certified mail. A formal, undeniable severing." I like the sound of that. "Good," I said. "Next." My will for the next hour. We went over everything. The will I had signed 10 years ago left everything to Robert, with the assumption he would care for the grandchildren. It was a legacy of trust, a trust that had been violated. "I want to change it," I said. "Completely." Mr. Fields listened patiently as I laid out my new plan. The house, the savings, the investments. He asked clear, pointed questions. He made notes. He treated my decisions with a quiet, professional gravity that was more validating than any expression of sympathy could ever be. He saw me not as a confused old man, but as a client with clear intentions. He saw me as a man who knew his own mind. "In the trust funds," I said, my voice dropping slightly. This was the heart of it. the educational trust for my grandchildren, Leo and Maya Williams. He found files. He opened them, his eyes scanning the figures. I saw a flicker of surprise in his expression, quickly masked. He had not known the extent of them. No one had. "They're substantial, Mr. Williams," he said. "I am aware," I replied. "I built them. I want them dissolved." This time he did pause. He looked up from the papers, his gaze meeting mine. He was searching for something. Anger? Spite? Senility? He found none of it. He only found resolve. "Dissolved," he repeated, as if to be certain. "The assets are to be liquidated," I instructed. "And redirected." I told him where I wanted the money to go. A large portion to establish the Eleanor Williams Scholarship Fund at Howard University, her alma mater. She'd always dreamed of giving back. Another portion to the local community technical school, to buy new equipment for their automotive and carpentry programs, to give young men and women the chance to learn a real trade, to build something with their hands. The rest was to be placed in a new trust. I gave him the name of the beneficiary. When I was finished, the office was silent. Mr. Fields looked down at his notes, then back at me. "This is a significant restructuring, Mr. Williams. It is, for all intents and purposes, a complete disinheritance of your direct lineage." "I am not disinheriting them," I said, the words coming out clearer than I could have imagined. "I am redirecting my legacy. It is my legacy. I earned it. I will decide its purpose." He nodded slowly. "Very well. I will begin the process. It will take some time. There are many steps. I have nothing but time," I said. I signed the initial documents to revoke the power of attorney right there in his office. The pen felt heavy and powerful in my hand. Each stroke of my name was an act of reclamation. When I was done, I stood up. I felt taller. "Thank you, Mr. Fields," I said, shaking his hand again. "Of course, Mr. Williams. I work for you. I work for you." 3 simple words. But in that moment, they were the most beautiful words I had ever heard. From the lawyer's office, I went to the bank. I didn't drive. I walked. The sun was higher now, warming the pavement. I looked at the faces of people passing by, everyone in their own world, rushing to their own appointments. For the first time in a long time, I felt like one of them. A man with a purpose. A man with business to attend to. The bank was an old building, with marble floors and high ceilings. It had been here since I was a boy. I had opened my first savings account here, depositing money from my paper route. I walked past the line of customers and went to the manager's office. I closed the joint account I shared with Robert, the one my pension was deposited into, the one he used for household expenses, which often seemed to include his own grocery bills and gas. I had the bank manager, a pleasant woman named Mrs. Gable, help me set up a new account, in my name only. I filled out the forms to have my pension and Social Security redirected. I also rented a safe deposit box. When the paperwork was done, a young man led me into the vault. The air was cool and still. The great steel door hissed shut behind us, a sound of absolute security. He used his key, then mine, and pulled out the long metal box. He left me alone in the small, private room. I sat down and opened my briefcase. Inside were the things that mattered. Eleanor's wedding ring, my father's watch, my discharge papers from the army, a small, faded photograph of my parents on their wedding day, and the deed to my house, the deed that was in my name and my name alone. I placed them all inside the metal box. One by one, they were not assets, they were my history, and they would no longer be left in a house where they could be misplaced, mishandled, or updated. When I was done, I closed the lid. I slid the box back into its slot in the wall. The young man locked it for me. As I walked out of the vault and back into the bright, noisy lobby of the bank, I felt a profound sense of peace. My past was now secure. My future was now my own. I got home in the early afternoon. The house was exactly as I had left it. Silent, waiting, but it felt different. It felt like mine again. I went to the garage. The smell of gasoline and old metal welcomed me like an old friend. In the corner, under a dusty canvas tarp, was a wooden chest. I opened it. Inside, nestled in soft cloth, was a set of brand-new socket wrenches. Gleaming chrome, perfectly weighted. I had bought them for Leo's 16th birthday. He was only 12, but I was planning ahead. I'd imagined teaching him how to use them, the same way my father had taught me. A legacy of a different kind. I took the wrenches out one by one. I wiped each one down with an oiled rag, though they were already pristine. I didn't put them back in the chest. I walked over to my own large, red toolbox, the one I'd used for 40 years at my shop, and I found an empty drawer. I fitted a new liner and I laid the new wrenches inside. They were not for Leo anymore. They were for me. They were for whatever project I decided to take on next. Back inside the house, I walked down the main hall. On the wall was a large, professionally framed family portrait taken a year ago. It was Susan's idea. We were all posed in a park, wearing coordinating cream-colored sweaters. I was seated on a bench, and they were all arranged around me, their hands on my shoulders. I looked at the photo. I looked at my own face. I was smiling, but it wasn't my smile. It was a polite, accommodating smile. The smile of a man trying not to be a nuisance. I didn't break it. I didn't tear it. My fight was not with objects. It was with assumptions. I carefully lifted the heavy frame off the hook. I carried it up the creaking stairs to the attic, the same attic where the remains of my great-grandmother's Bible now lay. I didn't look at the mess. I didn't want to see the confetti. I found an old, clean blanket. I wrapped the portrait carefully, as if it were something precious, and then I laid it gently against the far wall, behind a stack of old suitcases. Face down, out of sight, the wall in the hallway was now bare. It left a lighter rectangle on the wallpaper, a ghost of what had been there. It looked clean. It looked ready for something new. The first text message arrived 2 days later. It was a Friday morning. I was in the kitchen, enjoying my coffee and reading the newspaper, a pleasure I hadn't had time for in years. The phone buzzed on the counter, an angry, insistent sound. I picked it up. A message from Robert. Dad, bank sent a weird letter about the joint account being closed. Must be a mistake. Call me. A mistake. Of course. The only possible explanation in his mind was a bureaucratic error. The idea that I might have done it intentionally was so far outside his realm of possibility that it didn't even register. I was a fixed object in his universe. Planets don't just decide to leave their orbit. I looked at the message. I read it twice. I felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just a quiet confirmation. I was doing the right thing. I held my thumb over the screen. I deleted it. Not replied. Deleted. An hour later, the phone rang. Robert's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring, and ring, and ring, until it went to voicemail. A minute later, the phone buzzed again. A new voicemail. I didn't listen to it. I deleted that, too. Then I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I turned the ringer off. The silence that filled the house was absolute. It was beautiful. I spent the day in my workshop. I hadn't planned on it, but my hands needed to be busy. I found some old planks of cedar wood, fragrant and straight-grained. I decided to build a new set of shelves for my books. Simple shelves. Strong. Honest. The sound of the saw cutting through wood, the scrape of the hand plane shaving a fine curl from the edge, the smell of the sawdust. It was a balm to my soul. I was creating something. For me. For my house. The work was methodical, precise. Every measurement was exact. Every joint was tight. Late in the afternoon, the phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Susan. Arthur, Robert is worried sick. He's been calling you all day. Is everything okay? You're not answering. This isn't funny. Worried sick. I doubted that. Annoyed? Inconvenienced? Certainly. But worried? Worry requires empathy. It requires seeing the other person as a person. They were worried about a disruption to their routine. The machine had a glitch. This isn't funny. The accusation. The assumption that my silence was a joke, a prank, a childish bid for attention. It never occurred to her that it might be a consequence. I deleted her message, too. That evening, just as the sun was setting, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Headlights washed across the living room wall. It was Robert's silver egg of a car. I saw him get out. In the passenger seat was their dog, Buster, a yapping little thing I never much cared for. So, he had forgotten. Or, more likely, he had assumed that whatever was going on, the old agreements would still hold. Dad will watch the dog. Dad is always there. He walked up to the front door and rang the bell. The chime echoed through the silent house. I didn't move from my chair. I just sat there in the deepening twilight and listened. He rang it again, longer this time. Then he started knocking. Dad, are you in there? I've got Buster. I remained silent. I was a stone. I was a mountain. I was a man in his own house, choosing not to answer the door. It was a novel feeling, and it was intoxicating. I heard him sigh, a sound of pure frustration. I heard the jingle of keys. He was trying his key in the lock. It slid in, I'm sure, but it wouldn't turn, because the first thing I had done after returning from the lawyer and the bank was call a locksmith. The locks were new. The key on his chain was now just a useless piece of metal. A souvenir from a country he was no longer allowed to enter without a visa. He rattled the doorknob. Dad, what the hell is going on? Open the door. His voice was loud now, angry. The mask of concern had slipped completely, revealing the raw entitlement beneath. How dare the machine not work? How dare the door not open? I heard him stomp back to his car. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a new call. I let it buzz. Then a string of texts. Did you change the locks? Are you serious right now? Susan and I are supposed to be on the road. We're going to be late. This is incredibly childish, Dad. Whatever point you think you're making, you've made it. Now open the door. My point. He thought this was about making a point. Like I was a debater in an argument. He didn't understand that this wasn't an argument. This was a verdict. The trial was over. The jury, a jury of one, had returned its decision. I watched as he finally gave up. He got back in his car, the little dog yapping at the window. He backed out of the driveway, his tires squealing just a little on the pavement. He drove away. I sat in the quiet house. The last light of day faded from the sky. I didn't turn on a lamp. I just sat in the dark. I felt the silence settle around me, a comfortable old blanket. I had taken their key, and in doing so, I had taken back my house. I had taken back my life. The phone in my pocket was quiet. The night was my own. The next day was Saturday. I decided to go for a haircut. The barber shop, Cutting Up, has been on the same corner for 50 years. It's more than a place to get your hair cut. It's a sanctuary, a clubhouse. It smells of talcum powder, barbicide, and old newspapers. The sound is always the same. The buzz of clippers, the snap of a hot towel, the low murmur of conversation, and the sharp, satisfying crack of dominoes on a wooden table. James was there. Of course he was. James has been my friend for 60 years. We served in the same platoon in Vietnam. We came home and were best men at each other's weddings. He ran a hardware store until he retired. He knows me better than anyone, better than my own son. He was sitting in one of the old, cracked vinyl chairs, reading the sports page. He looked up as I walked in. He didn't smile, he just nodded. That's James. Economical with his expressions. Art, he said. James, I replied. I took the empty chair next to him. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, just watching the life of the shop unfold. Old Man Hemphill was holding court about politics. Two young men were arguing about basketball. It was a timeless scene. Finally, James folded his newspaper and set it on his lap. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and perceptive behind his glasses. You look different, he said. Not a question, a statement. Feel different, I admitted. Different good or different bad? Different, I said. Just different. Lighter, maybe, he grunted. He knew better than to pry. James always believed that a man would tell you what he needed you to know when he was ready. But he also knew how to listen to the silences. I decided to tell him a piece of it. Just a small piece. My grandkids, I started, my voice low. They were at the house. They broke something kids break things, Art. It's what they do. They broke Eleanor's mother's Bible, I said. The one her grandmother carried up from Mississippi. James went very still. He understood. He He was from a family that had come up from Georgia. He had his own heirlooms, a pocket watch, a set of his father's carving tools. He understood that for people like us, whose history was so often unwritten, these objects were not just things. They were scripture. He was silent for a long moment. He just stared straight ahead, at the wall of mirrors reflecting the life of the shop. "What did Robert say?" he asked, his voice quiet. "He said he'd sweep it up." James let out a short, sharp breath. It wasn't a laugh. It was a sound of profound, weary disappointment. He shook his head slowly. "Some folks," he said, his voice a low rumble, "wouldn't know history if it sat on their lap and called them grandpa." And there it was. Validation. The simple, unvarnished truth spoken by a man who knew the value of things. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He didn't tell me to forgive and forget. He saw the sacrilege for what it was. He confirmed my reality. "They used it to build a fort," I added. "They said the pages looked like confetti." James winced. He picked up his newspaper, then set it down again, as if his hands didn't know what to do with themselves. "The penmanship of disappointing sons," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Weak. No character in the letters." He was talking about more than handwriting. "I changed the locks," I said. He looked at me. A slow smile spread across his face. It was the first time I'd seen him smile all day. "About time," he said. "A man's house is his castle, not a bus station." After my haircut, we played a game of dominoes. The set was old, the ivory pieces yellowed and heavy in our hands. The sharp crack of the bones hitting the table was a kind of music. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We played the game, our focus absolute. I felt a sense of camaraderie, of belonging, that I hadn't felt in my own family for years. Here in this shop, I was not dad or grandpa, I was Art. A man with a history they all knew. A man who could play a mean game of dominoes. A man who was seen. When I left the barber shop, the sun was high and bright. I felt the warmth on my face. James's words echoed in my mind. A man's house is his castle. He was right, and it was time to finish fortifying the walls. The certified letters arrived at Robert's house on a Monday. I know this because the call came that evening. I didn't answer, of course. My phone had been on silent for 3 days. But this time, he didn't just leave a voicemail. He sent a barrage of texts, a digital onslaught of panic and rage. They came one after another, buzzing in my pocket as I sat on my back porch, watching the fireflies begin to the twilight. "A letter from your lawyer? Revoking power of attorney? What the hell have you done? Are you sick? Has something happened? Is someone taking advantage of you?" That one almost made me laugh. Is someone taking advantage of you? The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. For years, I had been taken advantage of, and he had been the one holding the knife. But he couldn't see it. In his mind, he was the protector, the responsible son managing his aging father's affairs. He couldn't conceive of a world where he was the villain of the story. The next text was from Susan. "Arthur, your son is having a panic attack. This is cruel. Whatever game you are playing, it has gone too far. You need to call us. Now." Cruel. A game. They still saw it as a performance. A tantrum. They were like people yelling at a locked door, rattling the handle, convinced the problem was with the door, not with the fact that they were no longer welcome inside. I put my phone on the table beside me, screen down. I didn't want to see the messages anymore. They were just noise. The real work was happening in quiet offices and bank vaults. The real work was the slow, methodical untangling of a lifetime. The next day, I went back to see Mr. Fields. "They have received the notices," he said as I sat down. His desk was covered in neat stacks of files. "My files. I have received several phone calls. I imagine you have," I said. "Your son is threatening legal action," he said, his tone neutral. "He is claiming diminished capacity on your part. He is suggesting you are being manipulated. And what did you tell him?" "I told him," Mr. Fields said, leaning back in his chair, "that in my professional opinion, you are one of the most clear-minded and decisive clients I have ever had the pleasure of representing. I also informed him that any further communication should be directed through me. I felt a wave of relief. This was why I had hired him. For this shield. For this calm, professional barrier between their chaos and my peace. Now, he said, leaning forward again, let's finalize the disposition of the trust assets. We spent the next 2 hours signing papers. It was a mountain of them. Documents that dissolved the trusts I had so carefully built for Leo and Maya. Documents that liquidated the stocks and bonds I had held for decades. Documents that transferred those vast sums into new accounts, the accounts I had designated. The Eleanor Williams Scholarship Fund was now real. It existed. I imagined a young woman, smart and ambitious like my Eleanor, getting a letter that told her she could afford to follow her dreams. I imagined her walking the campus at Howard, a place Eleanor loved, a place she always talked about. My money, my life's work, would make that possible. It felt right. It felt clean. The donation to the community technical school was also finalized. I specified that it was for the auto shop and the wood shop. New lathes, new diagnostic equipment, new tools, so that some young man or woman who might not be destined for a university could still learn a skill, could learn the dignity of working with their hands, could learn to build something real and lasting. The rest, a smaller but still significant portion, I had placed into a new trust for James's granddaughter, Sarah, a bright, kind girl who was studying to be a nurse. She never forgot my birthday. Every year, I got a card from her. She always asked about my workshop. She was the only one of the younger generation who seemed to see me as a person with my own interests. It felt right to invest in her future. As I signed the last document, my hand ached. But it was a good ache, the ache of honest work. "It is done," Mr. Field said, gathering the papers into a neat stack. "The transfers will take a few business days, but the instructions are irrevocable, irrevocable." The words settled in my chest, heavy and solid as an anchor. There was no going back. I had not just closed the door. I had dismantled it, taken it off its hinges, and bricked up the opening. I had thought I might feel a pang of regret, a moment of sadness for the future I had once envisioned for my grandchildren. But I felt nothing of the sort. I felt a profound sense of rightness. A legacy is not just money. It is a statement of values. My old legacy, the one that was now dissolved, was built on a foundation of hope and obligation. My new legacy was built on a foundation of dignity and purpose. It was a better foundation, a stronger one. That evening, they came. I knew they would. The letters, the silence, the changed locks. It was all leading to this. A confrontation. I was in my living room, listening to John Coltrane on the record player, the sound of his saxophone filling the quiet house. I saw the headlights slice across the wall, just as they had a few nights before. But this time, 2 car doors slammed. Both of them were here, Robert and Susan. They marched up the walkway like soldiers. They didn't bother with the doorbell. They just started pounding on the door. "Dad, open this door. We know you're in there." Robert's voice was strained, tight with fury. I turned the volume on the record player down slightly. I took a deep breath. I was not afraid. I was calm. I was ready. I walked to the door and opened it. I didn't swing it wide. I just opened it a few inches, leaving the chain on. They stood on my porch, their faces illuminated by the yellow porch light. Robert's face was red, his jaw clenched. Susan stood slightly behind him, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. "What the hell is this, Dad?" Robert began, his voice low and shaking with rage. "Lawyers? Changing locks? Cutting us off? What are you doing?" "I'm managing my own affairs, Robert," I said. My voice was quiet, much quieter than his. The contrast seemed to infuriate him more. "Your affairs?" he scoffed. "You're dissolving the kids' college funds. Are you insane? You're taking their future away from them over some broken book." He said it with such contempt. Some broken book. He still didn't understand. He never would. "It was not some broken book," I said, my voice as steady as the foundation of the house. It was my great-grandmother's Bible. It was the record of our family. It was the only thing she brought with her from Mississippi besides the clothes on her back. It was proof that we existed. It was an accident. Susan cut in, her voice sharp. Kids do stupid things. You can't punish them like this for the rest of their lives. It's monstrous. This is not a punishment, I said, looking from her to my son. A punishment is an emotional reaction. This is a logical consequence. You and your children have shown me, time and time again, that you do not understand the value of things. Not the value of history. Not the value of hard work. Not the value of a legacy. So I have decided to place that legacy in the hands of people who will. Robert looked stunned. He seemed to be at a loss for words. He was used to me being quiet, accommodating. He was not used to me being firm, articulate. The Bible, I continued, my voice still low and even, was simply the final piece of evidence. It was the moment the lens came into focus. You didn't call me to apologize. You called to tell me you'd be late for your trip to the lake. You offered to sweep it up. You saw a mess, Robert. You did not see a tragedy. Just like you saw a rust bucket, not my history. Just like you saw an inconvenient old chair, not your mother's favorite seat. You don't see, I looked my son in the eye. For the first time, I think he truly heard me. Not just the words, but the lifetime of quiet pain behind them. His anger seemed to drain away, replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. I see you as a resource, I said, laying the final truth bare. A convenience. A caretaker for my house and a sitter for your dog. You have not seen me as a person in a very long time. So I have decided to reclaim my personhood. The new arrangements are in place, I concluded. The house is mine. My finances are my own. You are my son, and you are welcome in my life, but you're no longer in charge of it. From now on, you'll call before you come. You'll be a guest in this house, not a landlord. Those are the new rules. Susan opened her mouth to say something, her face a mask of indignation. But Robert put a hand on her arm. He just stared at me, his eyes wide. He looked like a man who had been slapped awake. I did not wait for a response. There was nothing more to say. I quietly closed the door. I didn't slam it. I just closed it. I slid the bolt home. The click was loud in the sudden silence. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the door. I could hear them talking on the porch, their voices muffled and indistinct. Then, I heard their footsteps on the walkway. I heard their car doors close. I heard the engine start, and then they were gone. I walked back to my chair in the living room. John Coltrane had finished his song. The record player hissed softly, the needle resting in the final groove. I didn't get up to change it. I just sat there in the quiet and listened to the sound of my own breathing. The war was over, and the peace that followed was vast and deep and all my own. In the weeks that followed, a new kind of quiet settled over the house. It wasn't the empty quiet of loneliness I had known before. It was a clean, expansive quiet, the quiet of sovereignty. My phone no longer buzzed with demands or passive-aggressive texts. After that night on the porch, the barrage had stopped. There was only silence from their end. I imagined them in their house, confused, angry, maybe even hurt. But their feelings were no longer my responsibility to manage. I had spent a lifetime managing the feelings of others. I was retired from that job, too. I established a new routine, a new life, built from the salvaged pieces of the old one. I woke with the sun. I made my coffee, just for me. I read the entire newspaper, front to back, every single morning. I rediscovered the joy of the comics page, something I hadn't looked at in 30 years. I worked on the cedar shelf for my books. I took my time. There was no deadline, no one to please but myself. I sanded the wood until it was smooth as silk. I joined the corners with dovetails, a difficult, time-consuming joint that no one but me would ever notice. But I would know. I would know it was built to last. I would know it was done right. I listened to my music. The blues, jazz, Motown. The music of my life. I turned it up loud, letting the sound of B. King's guitar fill every room in the house. No one was there to call it old man music. It was just music, and it was mine. One afternoon, I drove to a nursery and bought 3 new rose bushes. Eleanor had loved her roses. After she was gone, I had tried to keep them up, but in the last few years, I had let them go. The weeds had taken over. It had seemed like too much effort. Now, I found the effort again. I pulled the weeds. I turned the soil. I mixed in compost. I planted the new bushes with care, my hands deep in the rich, dark earth. It was hard work. My back ached, but it was a good ache. The ache of cultivation, of bringing something beautiful back to life. James came by sometimes. He wouldn't call first. He would just appear on the back porch, holding 2 bottles of cold beer. We would sit in the old metal chairs and watch the sun go down. We talked about old times. We talked about cars. We talked about the state of the world. We never once talked about Robert or the family. He knew I didn't need to. He just provided the quiet company of a friend. His presence was an unspoken statement. I am here. I see you. I started writing in my little notebook again. Not just lists of chores, but thoughts, observations. Today, I fixed the dripping tap in the bathroom. The sound of it had been a quiet irritation for months. Robert had promised to fix it a year ago. It took me 15 minutes and a new washer. The silence in the house is now complete. I found an old recipe of Eleanor's for lemon pound cake. I baked it this afternoon. The house smells like she is just in the next room. I ate a slice while it was still warm. I did not have to share it. The new shelves are finished. I spent the day arranging my books, putting them in order. History, biographies, poetry, my father's old manuals on mechanics. Seeing them all together, organized and respected, feels like putting my own mind in order. Life became a series of small, deliberate pleasures. The taste of my morning coffee, the weight of a good tool in my hand, the sound of a favorite record, the scent of a newly bloomed rose. I was no longer waiting for a phone call, waiting for a visit, waiting for a sliver of acknowledgement. I was just living. Each day was a thing in itself, not a prelude to someone else's needs. About a month after the confrontation, a letter arrived. It was not a bill. It was not junk mail. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope. The address was handwritten. The penmanship was familiar. It was from Robert. I held it in my hand for a long time. It felt heavy. I didn't feel dread. I didn't feel anger. I felt a quiet curiosity. I did not tear it open. I took it into the living room and placed it on the mantelpiece, leaning it against the old clock. It stood there, a silent white rectangle in the heart of my reclaimed home. I looked at it. A letter, not a text, not a voicemail left in anger. A letter, an act of intention, an act that required time and thought and a stamp. It was a gesture, the first one he had made in a long time that was not a demand. I did not read it. Not that day. Not the next. The letter could wait. It might be an apology. It might be a final, bitter tirade. It might be a clumsy attempt at understanding. Whatever it was on his terms, written in his time. My reading of it would be on my terms and my time. The power had shifted. He was now the one waiting. He was now the one hoping for a response. The door to reconciliation was not locked and bolted. I had not bricked it up as I had once thought. I had simply closed it. Now it was up to him to knock, gently, and to wait for me to decide if I wanted to open it. Maybe I would read his letter tomorrow. Maybe next week. Maybe never. For now, it was enough to know that it was there. It was enough to know that I had the choice. I sat down in my wingback chair, the leather sighing as it took my weight. The evening sun slanted through the window, falling across the new rose bushes outside. The house was quiet. It was my quiet. I reached over and put a new record on the turntable. The gentle crackle, the hiss, and then the first mournful, beautiful notes of a saxophone filled the air. I closed my eyes. I was not happy, not in the way people mean it. Happiness is a fleeting, excitable thing. What I felt was deeper. It was a sense of being whole, a sense of being steady, a sense of peace, earned and paid for in full. I was Arthur Williams. I was in my house, and I was free. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to know they're not alone.